heck of a lot that that I can add to that introduction. I've been shearing now for only about 10 years, actually. And this is something I'm really passionate about. Allows me to help the industry out, and there's a lot of things that we're going to try to cover today, so I'm going to get right started with that. I gotta try to move this split screen a little bit. I can't read half my stuff. IT girl. Sorry about this, guys. Can I move that split screen because I can't read my own slide? Perfect. Okay.
Can she hear you?
Yeah, I think everybody can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, there you go. There.
Okay. So we're gonna get started here. Why do we shear sheep? First and foremost is fiber production. Historically, anyhow, right now the wool market's really in the tank, unfortunately, but I think that creates an opportunity where people start really working hard to find new applications for it. Sheep hygiene and overall health, animal health, and prevention of a lot of conditions like fly strike and cast ewes and smothered lambs helps with air quality in barns and floor space and a lot of things like that. And on this subject, as far as hygiene goes, one thing I want to rant a little bit about right now is around bale feeders and getting a lot of vegetable matter into your wool. It doesn't add any value to your fiber production. And if anybody's ever dumped a bunch of chaff or barley dust down their backs, that's what these sheep have to live with every day when they're got their head stuck in a bunk feeder. So do what you can to manage your wool and for the health of your animal. Animal health, otherwise, one of the best aspects of shearing, I think, for a producer is it gives you an outside, fairly non-political third-party analysis of your flock annually, and shearers have an opportunity to see 200 or 300 flocks a year, so we have a pretty neat perspective of different systems and whatnot. So you're able to evaluate your animal health, realize if you've got KEDs or lice, maybe make some nutrition adjustments for body condition, for lambing, for multiples, and improve your overall production. Prevention, this has a lot to do with timing of when you shear. Fly strike is when maggots will lay eggs in a dirty piece of wool during wet, moist, warm weather. Generally happens in late May, early June into July. It's highly dependent on the breed of sheep that you have. Once those maggots get started in the sheep, if conditions persist or the fly population is high and the breed of sheep and the amount of dirt on the sheep is excessive, those maggots will consume that sheep. Wolves used with a lot of wool get cast on their backs, especially when they're heavy and lamb, can't get up. They tend to perish if they're not found. And particularly with winter lambing or jug lambing, a ewe with full fleece will lay on her lambs accidentally, quite often doesn't feel them, doesn't realize where her footprint is, and generally equates to probably an increase of 5 to 10% death loss in your lamb crop. So things you need to know as a producer: preparation and setup for shearing, how to recognize and implement humane sheep handling. We're going to go over choosing a shear, some logistics in the industry in Canada, and shearing rates. Okay, so starting with preparation, we need a clean, level area. Ashley, can you guys see my mouse bouncing around on the screen at all?
Yes, I can see your mouse.
Okay, awesome. So we're lucky in this particular shed here. It's got a nice poured cement level floor. You need a sheet of plywood or OSB board, easier on the sheep, the shearer, the wool handlers, It prevents blades from getting chipped and broken, which will, if not noticed, end up cutting a sheep. This barn, sheep come in this back door here into a handling area behind the skirting table. And this is a trip door. The sheep can come out here and be shorn. There's another one outside of the screen. Has a pretty standardized setup. So this is the efficient delivery of delivering sheep to the shearer. Good lighting. We got a halogen light hanging here. These new LEDs are awesome, that you can just screw into your receptacle in your barn. Your 110 power source. And lastly, in preparation, communicate well in advance with your shearers. More experienced shearers are booked generally 2 or 3 months in advance. Really hard to fit in new producers. Our biggest challenge in this country is the vast area that we have to cover. So if you can communicate with other local producers so that we're not driving back to the same place 3 or 4 times a year, if we can organize it so that we can do 3 or 4 producers when we're in the same neck of the woods, that saves us a lot and also helps us to get to you when you need your sheep shorn. So facility setup, here's another example of a race or single file. We generally are set up so there's a bait sheep at the front. She stays there for the morning or the afternoon, and then there's a trip door comes up to the side, and shearers can get at it there. So that's pretty basic. The other aspect you can have, and this works probably better for smaller producers, 20 head or less, something the size of a box stall. And then if you have either a batwing door or somebody that can man a gate to shear outside that stall, or even to shear inside that stall, if you have an easy way to fill it, you can shear 5 or 10 at a time right inside there. If it's level, you got a piece of plywood in there and a place to fasten the machine. And then setup is relatively simple. You don't need somebody bringing up sheep all the time. You load it, and then you got your 5 or 10 sheep to shear, and the producer can start handling wool. And keep in mind with facility setup, animal behavior. Sheep are springs. What this means is that the more you push a sheep, the more she's going to push back. If you try to push her out a gate, she's going to come back at you. The harder you holler and yell and swat at her, the more she's going to run right over top of you. So slow is fast, less stress on the sheep. It's amazing how that works. Here's another example of facility setup. The sheep are housed right here at the left of the screen out of view. This is an alleyway between 2 barns. So the sheep are actually came from to the right of the screen in the morning past these shearing chutes. And so they're going to want to flow back. Again, sheep are springs. They went one way and now they're going to want to flow in the direction. It just makes life so much easier for the producers. So this is the mobile chute that I pack with me. It's 8 feet long. It's got a latching trip door. The bat wings out, and then there's your bait sheep sits at the front. Overhead motor is hangs right off the chute, and you just need something level to set it on and a way to deliver the sheep into it. So that's the basics with that. And more on main sheep handling. We always recommend to take sheep off feed and water by noon the day before shearing. There's several reasons for this. The number one traditional reason is to keep your wool clean. So those sheep are starting to clean out. They're not going to pee and poop on the board. The other aspect of getting the board dirty is the shearing population of shearers in Canada is extremely limited right now. So if a shearer is going to hurt himself the 1st of April, there's probably 5,000 or 6,000 sheep that aren't going to get shorn until September this year. So a wet board or slippery board is a hazard to the shearer, and maybe it's not a big deal to this producer this day, but the other 5 or 6 producers that are booked that week that the shearer is not going to get to are really put out by it. So think of your other producers that way. One exception to taking sheep off feed and water is with really prolific flocks. If we're shearing like a week before lambing, they're at serious risk of ketosis, and really their intake is pretty minimal compared to the amount of lamb displacement on them. And so it's not ideal for us as shearers or for the sheep, but it's the best that we can do. And for their welfare, keep them on a bunk, maybe try to keep them off water the night before, but just have as less stress on those real pregnant ewes in high prolificacy situation as you can. Keeping sheep dry, really difficult to do for winter shearing, really difficult for grass lambers without facilities. Makes a shearer's life a logistical nightmare when you drive 5 hours one way and it snows or rains, and then you have to drive 5 hours the other way to find dry sheep and not get too far behind. So try to have a plan in place or a facility in place to keep a certain aspect of your flock dry if you can. And catching and handling sheep properly. Less is more a lot of times. The less noise, the less quickly you move around, the more you let sheep move naturally. They're really intelligent creatures, and if you're not threatening them like a wolf, they remember where they went last time and how to get out and how to do everything, and they'll work a lot better for you. So there's pressure points for moving and controlling sheep. So the first one is the jaw, and that refers specifically to the muzzle. So your first plan of attack, if you're catching a sheep, is to kind of underhand sweep like you're pitching a softball. Catch her right by that bottom jaw at the muzzle. If you catch her deep in the chin, she'll put all 4 feet down and push all her weight against you. But if you catch her right on the chin and lift that head up, generally that puts the brakes on her. The shoulder refers to actual shearing positions, getting the leg straight and the skin tight. There's a pressure point there that straightens that leg so you don't cut them. The tail, I don't know how many of you producers have had to put 200 pounds of pressure behind you and actually push her full force. And again, she's a spring. She's got 4 feet planted. She's pushing all her might back at you. You grab her right at the base of the tail and lift and pull, and it takes 4 or 5 pounds of pressure. And the stifle, we're going to go over that a little bit in the shearing video. Pressing on the point of the stifle straightens the back leg, prevents you from hamstringing those ewes when you're shearing. It's a good indicator of a shearer that knows what he's doing. So this little girl's got that lamb by the bottom chin, and that lamb is actually not that wild, but he's not even trying to go anywhere. Again, ergonomics of handling sheep so that they're not being injured. It's important when you're dragging sheep to keep your heels, your hips, and your shoulders in alignment. If you start bending over at the waist, that sheep center of gravity drops down. The point between your hip and your hand gets farther and farther behind, or farther and farther apart. You have less leverage and you're going to hurt yourself. Absolutely. So here's a girl. This is her 3rd time tipping a sheep out of a chute. She's 13 years old. See, she's got her hand on the bottom jaw. Her other hand is back by the tail. And this is probably a 150-pound ewe, and she has a bit of a bobble off balance here. She straightens up, she gets her shoulders back, and she's able to pull that ewe across there, no problem. So proper technique, so the sheep's not injured and the people that are handling the sheep aren't injured, and you don't feel like a truck ran over you at the end of the day. Now, this is a tricky thing with our industry right now, logistics and timing. When do I shear? There's a lot of things to consider in this. First of all, we have about half the shears that are probably required to cover Western Canada right now, when people would ideally want to shear. So most importantly is evaluating your production system, what you have for facilities, when you lamb, whether your barn is insulated or if you have a barn at all. Then there's a lot of breed considerations that can open, expand, or narrow your window of when you are able to shear for your best benefit. In that light, there's a couple different pieces of equipment gear-wise that everybody should have a basic understanding of. So this first comb in the left-hand slide is a winter comb. So they're a 9-tooth comb, gives you wider space between the teeth, and they have these lifters on them. So it's twice the thickness of a normal 13-tooth comb that's traditionally used. So they leave 2.5 times the wool on your ewes. So if you're winter lambing, early spring lambing, if you don't have an insulated barn, you have weather exposure, these are a really good tool. On that note, not everything's perfect. With those wider gaps, you're going to get more nicks with a novice shearer. There's more likelihood of a finger or a teat slipping in between these teeth and causing injury. We don't want that. So they're definitely something that you want to have an experienced shearer using. But it definitely leaves a lot more wind and rain and weather protection on those ewes. So considerations for winter and confined lambing. Ideally, a pre-lamb shear increases bunk space, improves air quality, increases lamb survival. It's really interesting to see, like, you go into a barn that's full of wooled sheep and the barn's cold and dripping, and take the wool off, and the barn temperature generally rises 5 to 10 degrees. Air is a lot drier, the sheep aren't sweating, you got twice as much floor space, and everybody's a heck of a lot healthier. So ideally, we want to shear those ewes 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing. But if the barn isn't insulated, if you don't have a lot of housing space, so a lot of places, just due to that square footage, we're shearing the week before, as long as we don't have a snowstorm or something, and then that producer's in a lot of trouble. So those are all factors that you want to consider. Body condition score as well, particularly with high prolificity flocks. If they're under-conditioned, have a parasite load, maybe shearing pre-lambing isn't the best bet for you. You also have to consider post-lambing housing, how soon they're going to go out to the barn, if they're going out while they're lactating. And genetics are often overlooked. If you have good Corriedale, wool, Dorset even, range type ewes with good dense fleeces, they can handle winter lambing, winter shearing a lot better than if you have your more domestic prolific breeds that just don't have a lot of wool. Shearing on the same date, those prolific breeds with shorter, more open fleeces are going to be far more exposed to the weather. I don't recommend shearing those unless you have an insulated barn, winter shearing. Shear safety, again, I kind of covered this before. Dry sheep in a warm, draft-free shearing area. Again, we're flat out as shearers trying to get everybody taken care of the best we can, and injuries and sickness don't serve the industry very well. So for other producers' sake, so we can keep going and maintain our physical soundness and whatnot, it's really important for shearers to continue day after day. It's a prerequisite that we can actually work up a sweat. Flushes your muscles and allows you to maintain a better rhythm. Otherwise, we just kind of get old and crotchety and stiff, and I won't say grumpy because life's too fun. So other options we have if you're winter lambing is to shear in the fall, September, October, November, and especially getting back to the genetics. If you've got, let's say, Rideau ewes, September, October shearing, they're only going to have maybe 3 or 4 months wool on them if they're lambing, February, March. So there's not enough fleece on them to cause them to smother lambs or get cast. And maybe you're not going to keep the barn as dry. But the other thing to consider is it's a lot easier to find a shearer in October, November than it is in February, March, April. For grass lambers, pre-lamb shear is your best choice. Again, 6 weeks or more pre-lambing, or pardon me, 4 to 6 weeks pre-lambing, or alternatively, if you can go later is better post-lambing. So grass lambers that lamb, let's say in May and shear in August, those ewes are only going to have 9 or 10 months worth of wool on them the next season. So that's doable for lambing with the wool on, especially on grass. They're well protected from the weather when they're lambing. If you've got range ewes that are more prone to fly strike, or you live farther west, farther north in this province where the weather's wetter, your best option is going to be to try to get them shorn pre-lambing. So again, consider your breeds that you're using and go with that. Another thing that we do a lot of in the summer is lamb and hogget pre-breeding shear. There's a lot of benefits to this, improvements in gain and growth and fertility. Shearing tends to trigger a certain amount of ovulation. I don't have any scientific data, but watching producers that do this, the return on investment getting the wool off those lambs midsummer, it's something that works really well in our operation. So choosing a shearer, number one consideration is that they're going to handle your sheep humanely. There's no reason or justification for torquing on a used leg or beating on them or getting angry at them. They're just sheep. They don't know any better. Sometimes they're scared or kick or whatever happens. But they're a valuable commodity, and it's not a shearer's job to not only send you a bill at the end of the day, but also cost you the soundness of a couple of ewes. Secondly is their ability. Keep in mind, we all start somewhere. There's novice shearers there that are doing their best, and that's great. Particularly with smaller flocks, they're going to be able to get there in a more timely fashion than the more experienced shearers. And so that also has to do with their availability. Sometimes a producer, due to their location, maybe has to make some compromises to be able to get a shear when they need them. And for myself, as long as a shearer has a commitment to be better, has the right attitude, frame of mind, is doing the best job that he can, and he's getting better every year, or she's getting better every year, that's fantastic. I still take an advanced shearing school every chance I get, and it pays huge dividends for me professionally. I can't imagine struggling through without continued learning, continued skill development. I mean, teachers have professional development days, and shearers should be no different. So here's a quick video. I guess what we want to do, our goals as shearers is to provide a good wool clip quality. So essentially shear the sheep once, don't make any second cuts. Good animal welfare. So everything we do, we want to keep the sheep comfortable and balanced so it's not struggling. And a lot of producers don't understand why shearers are always going so fast, but the faster you can shear a sheep, the less stress there is on that sheep. She's more comfortable, she's less apt to struggle, she's less apt to injure herself. So particularly with pregnant ewes, speed is a factor that's relatively important. And shear ergonomics are also highly important, so that the shear is not injured and the sheep isn't injured. If the shear or the sheep isn't comfortable, it's going to be a battle, and inevitably somebody's going to get hurt. So we're going to play this video here. I don't know if I can, probably can't mute that for you. So you got clean blow down the belly. Every blow starts on the skin. It's really important for the left hand to be working as hard as the right hand, keeping the skin tight so you're not making any nicks. So I'm just going to back up a little bit here, try to stop this. I referred to a pressure point on the hip there, and that's right here. So that keeps this leg straight, and you work it here and on the last hind leg. So you're not going to cut any tendons. It keeps that leg straight so there's no kicking and nothing gets injured. So that's called the undermine. For pretty much every blow that a shearer takes on the sheep, there's a certain amount of balance and body position adjustment to keep the sheep comfortable in position so that the next blow can take place effectively and efficiently. So this is called the walkabout here, and then you turn the sheep into the start of the long blow. So that sheep started on its backbone. Now right here, this is a key thing where a lot of shearers get hurt and a lot of people get in a fight with the sheep. Now, I'm not lifting this sheep off the floor. I'm actually pushing her head down between my knees, and she just naturally rolls up, and we're able to continue shearing. I got hands free to hold the skin. Really easy on the ewe. She hasn't struggled at all this whole time. We're down the last side, and back up just a second. Again, we're on that stifle. And another thing to note, like these are pregnant ewes, and all my weight here, I've got a hold of the skin with my fingers, and I'm pushing on this stifle joint. I'm not putting any pressure on this ewe's belly. And it's a pet peeve of mine that shearers will put their fist into that flank to keep the skin tight when they've got lambs in there. It's just terrible, poor practice. Okay, next slide. Shearing rates. Now, these are just considerations so everybody's just kind of on the same page. You know, overseas, a person can shear 5 or 6 days a week, and you're never more than 10 or 15 minutes from your job. In Western Canada, we're averaging about 4 hours travel time per flock. So when I show up at a producer's place, I've incurred $280 worth of expenses in travel alone. Also, because I have a farm at home, I've got another couple $100 worth of expenses in people that are doing chores for me while I'm gone. So rates are now ranging from $6 to $100 per sheep. And a lot of that just has to do with the volume of sheep that you have, your location, logistics, whether you've organized it with anybody else, when you want to shear. Another thing that we want to consider when you're choosing a shear or looking for shearing rates is also your other costs. How long is that shear going to be there? Are your sheep all going to come out the other side in good health and uninjured? How many people do you need to hire to help with wool and help with bringing up sheep? And how many days is that going to take depending on the size of your flock? So those are all just other considerations that are separate from your per head cost. We're on the road driving more than we are shearing, so cooperation with producers is greatly appreciated in that aspect. Just wanted everybody to understand that. So my wife thought we should put this in here. Yeah, we put in enough hours in a day. So now we are going to be open for questions. So if anybody wants to go back to another slide or address anything we've covered or anything that we haven't, fire away.
Thank you, John. If anyone does have questions, you can either unmute yourself to ask the question, or you can also type it in the chat box.
I have a question to start. any producers or shearers online have had sheep injured by shearers. From my personal experience, I've injured a few sheep in my career. It's definitely something that happens. It's a dangerous thing. I've seen shearers get injured, and I just want producers to keep in mind, we do the best we can. Accidents do happen, but we do everything we can as an industry to prevent that from happening.
Oh, there is a question that came through. It says, how close to lambing dates do you feel comfortable shearing in terms of you/lamb safety?
Okay, that's an excellent question. And I'm comfortable shearing a sheep while she's lambing, and I haven't found adverse effects of that. But if you have a novice shearer that takes 20 minutes to shear that sheep, that's a whole different issue, and maybe you want to be at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of lambing before you attempt rolling her around like that. The aspects of as shearers become more proficient, the sheep becomes more comfortable, and there's a lot less pressure on them. But particularly with these prolific flocks, there's so much pressure on their organs and lungs that if you take too long and that sheep's uncomfortable and struggling, you risk blowing up her heart or collapsing a lung or things like that. As long as that sheep can be shorn in under 2 minutes and she's being handled nicely and she's not being stressed coming up to be shorn and she's not being stressed afterwards, it's not a concern of mine. So you have to weigh a few different factors in there as far as that goes.
There's another question that came through. It says, so the opposite question, how long after they lamb is better to shear?
Okay. So it's not a big panic to get them shorn after they've lambed. I prefer to wait until they're weaned. Our schedule right now for shears is absolutely insane. Just, I guess, to share some industry perspective, we've lost over half of our shears in Western Canada in the last 5 years. There's a few learners that are getting started and are going to be great, but it's going to take them a little bit to get seasoned and pick up the slack from where we had a crew of New Zealanders in Alberta for quite a few years that aren't back yet, and a few other senior shearers that have just retired, and a few not so senior shearers that have retired. So if you're going to lamb in April, you didn't get them shorn beforehand, and not necessarily any fault of your own, it's okay to wait till June, even July, especially like if you got Suffolk or Rideau ewes and they're already lambed out, there's no problem with waiting until July, even August, to get them shorn.
And another comment said, thank you, they won't overheat in July and August.
Well, as long as they're being handled fairly. Interesting thing with wool is that it's insulating, right? So as long as you're not overheating the sheep internally, they're definitely going to hunt shade when it's like it was last July. But they're actually wearing their shade with them. Protects them a lot from that solar energy versus if they're fresh thorn. So yeah, they're going to be warm regardless, but wool has an interesting properties about it. That's I mean, there's ewes with full wool that run in Australia at 50 degrees and survive it. So it's maybe not ideal, but it's definitely not a health concern for them in Alberta.
I had a question for you, John. I was just wondering, as producers, how many use per day should we expect our shears to be doing?
It all depends on that shearer and his experience, for one, and secondly on how well your system is and how well your sheep shear. So if your ewes are in good condition, like, I'm going to get a little bit distracted here, but it's really interesting to note that nutrition and ease of shearing, or ability for sheep to be shorn, is highly correlated. So under conditioned ewes, or ewes with some sort of deficiencies or with lice and keds and whatnot, are a heck of a lot more difficult to shear, especially for novice shearers. They're really sticky and the wool's often felted. And again, if they've got a round bale feeder, they've had their head stuck in all winter, it makes it really difficult, particularly for a novice shearer, to get them done. Also breed specific, little Rideaus can be shorn pretty easily, do a lot more of them in a day than if you're going to be shearing a bunch of Corriedales. Like for myself, I'm pretty comfortable shearing 200 Rideaus in a day, even 300 lambs. If I get into some big Corriedales, 150 and I'm absolutely finished. I need the next day off. So, and with the Rideaus too, if they're under conditioned and in full lamb, you're not going to hit that 200. And for some novice shearers, 20 is all they're going to get done in a day. They're physically beat after that's done, and that's probably 5 hours of shearing. But I started there at one point too. I could do 40 a day, and I needed 10 Advil to get out of bed the next morning. So yeah, we all start somewhere there. So it's all relative to your system. You got to get to know your shearers, ask what they're capable of, let them know what your system's like, and go from there. Also, like, phone different shearers and get references and whatnot. Like when a new producer phones me, the first thing I want to know is who shore for them last year. I don't want to step on anybody's toes or steal anybody's work. I have plenty, and it's also kind of poor etiquette for producers to switch shearers all the time when we're trying to plan logistically, so we don't have to pass all our travel costs off onto each producer because we're spending 6 or 7 hours driving every day and only shearing for 3 or 4.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
John, more questions?
Nope. Yeah.
There's 2. So the first is, how does a person get started, or how does a person get started into the shearing industry? Where do you get your start?
Awesome. There's a beginner school that Sean Fainer teaches in Alberta. I think he might even be doing 2 years, or pardon me, 2 schools this year. From there in Canada, it's really difficult to get enough experience to progress rapidly, because a lot of bigger producers really don't want a real novice shearer fighting too long with their ewes. And because the travel costs become prohibitive. If you're a young shearer getting started and you're only doing 20 a day, and you have to drive 2 or 3 hours to get that 20 sheep shorn, it's just not feasible. You're donating your time. So if you do get started and like the pain and everything, I'd recommend going overseas and getting some training, professional training, Australia or the UK, until you got enough confidence you can come back and do 40 or 50 a day at least, with confidence, so you're not injuring sheep or cutting everything up, and then go from there. There's more than enough work, and pretty recession proof career.
Okay, and the next question says, in regards to selling ewes that are not sheared, is there any concern for the new buyers? Example, buying and hauling 300 plus kilometers, then change of feed and water. Should the buyers wait until after lambing?
Can you just repeat that question so I fully understand that?
Yeah, so there's just the 3 parts to it. So one is, in regards to selling ewes that are not sheared, is there any concern for the new buyers? Example, buying and hauling 300+ kilometers, then change of feed and water. Should the buyers wait until after lambing?
Well, the change of feed and water is a totally different or irrelevant point, I guess, as opposed to shearing. Moving ewes pre-lambing in any system, shorn or unshorn, is a big risk because they're changing environments and diets and everything, and they're already at peak stress in their production cycle. Ideally, post-lambing, those ewes are back up to full rumen intake, and they can withstand a ton more stress because they're eating enough, and maybe they're going to withstand a lot more changes. Shearing, like full wool ewes certainly don't haul as well. Full wool anything doesn't haul as well. Like I feed a bunch of lambs and I shear my lambs when I can before they get on a truck. I can haul 30% more lambs or ewes. They load and unload better, and I don't ever have any piling up, smothering issues with shorn sheep. They just behave differently. They have good visibility. They don't push on each other because they can feel each other. So shearing is definitely good husbandry when it comes to moving sheep. And from the buyer's perspective too, you can see what you're getting. You see what their body condition score is, and all these things that maybe see some age on them that isn't evident with the wool on them. But then you also have to consider environmental factors in Alberta or Western Canada. If it's February, please leave the wool on them. Far less stress on those ewes. So it's all situation specific.
Are there any other questions for John?
Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity, Alberta Lamb Producers. I hope it's helpful for everybody, and it's been a great evening.
I have one more question for you, John, real quick.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the cable-driven or electric shears?
So handheld electric shears are great for 1 or 2 sheep. Their motors cannot cool quickly enough for the torque that's required to shear sheep. Like if you give me a brand new set of handheld electric shears, I'll kill it within the first hour. So it's really not practical other than doing a little bit of crutching and whatnot. The overhead machines are a requirement.
I did have another comment that came through for you, John, thanking you and saying any markets for wool at all.
Any markets for wool?
Mm-hmm.
So in the last year, I guess, there's been several imported wool pelleting machines for garden amendments. I don't know that that's going to become lucrative for the producer themselves, but at least we're not throwing it in a landfill. It's a tremendous resource, and it's a bloody shame to see it not getting utilized in some way, shape, or form. I insulated a lambing barn with wool. It's got an R50 wall. I've seen wool go into trenches to cover water lines and insulate them. Custom woolen mills and car stairs takes good quality, clean, skirted wool that's not too coarse and full of kemp. So there is still, small limited markets out there. And I think within the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see a certain amount of recovery in that aspect. I mean, we still want to do the best job we can of producing a product that's usable to the end user. Just because it's worthless doesn't mean we want to fill it full of chaff and just make a mess of it.
Just another avenue as well. Sorry, John, I didn't remember if you had said Custom Woolen Mills is another place in Alberta that also accepts wool. If some producers had any other questions, I know that there is the national group, the Campaign for Wool. They've hosted a couple different events. One was the Canadian Wool Industry Town Hall, where there was the unveiling of the carpet plan from 2022 to 2025. I do know CCWG also has opened up funding for research initiatives that pertain to wool and trying to advance that. And ALP as well, we have that as a part of our strategic plan where we're always looking to find more ways that we can add or have more value added opportunities for producers in wool. So by all means, if there's any comments or concerns or suggestions, please don't hesitate to send them into the office. We're always all ears and looking to see how we can expand that.
Great.
Perfect. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I would like to thank you very much, John, and to all of our participants who joined us this evening. This will conclude the webinar. I will be sending an email to everyone who registered for this evening's session that'll include a link to where you can access the webinar recording.
Excellent. Thanks, Ashley.